And so let's get to that keynote. And with digital Darwinism, changing digital behavior on the rise, are we all becoming part of an experience economy? To introduce digital analyst, anthropologist and futurist Brian Solis, would you please welcome from the BBC, Ros Atkins.
Hello everyone, thank you very much indeed for coming. I can remember a few years ago at the BBC we used to have discussions about digital disruption and the degree to which the evolution of digital products was changing the way we did journalism and the way we're all leading our lives. We don't really have those discussions anymore. That's not to say we're not discussing how digital is changing everything, but there's no discussion about whether it's changing anything. It is now accepted that we're living in the most disruptive time that certainly journalism has known in the last century, and we're trying to fathom what to do about that. And I'm sure you all are in the travel industry too. And perhaps it is inevitable when we accept the scale of digital change that's coming that we all tend to focus on the areas where we work. So for instance, I spend a lot of time thinking about how digital journalism should manifest itself. Many of you will spend a lot of time thinking about how digital changes the travel industry, and of course there are others thinking about how we date, how we interact with our families, how we buy, how we sell. All aspects of our life have changed, and you could argue all aspects of our societies are being fundamentally changed too. The risk is that we focus in so hard on the area that we're concerned with that perhaps we don't step back and take a broader picture and really to understand a product that you're making and how effective it can be, whether it's a news story for me or a holiday for the many people who are gathered here. We do need to step back. We need to understand how all of these changes are fitting together, which is why I'm so excited to listen to our next guest, Brian Solis, because he looks at anthropology, at sociology, at marketing, at digital products, at how all of these things fit together and impact on the lives we lead, the products we sell, and the products we buy. We're going to listen to Brian for 20 or 25 minutes, but there will be plenty of time afterwards for me and for all of you to ask him questions on any of the subjects you would like to. So without any further ado, Brian Solis.
Thank you, sir. See you soon. Thank you for being here today, and hopefully together we come up with some answers that help shape your future, not just the future of the travel industry, but your future, right? Any great story about the future starts with an individual, and then how that individual works collaboratively with others to bring about change. One of the key focuses that I have today is on experience. And that word experience, I'm sure it's a word that you use 1,000 times a day or hear 1,000 times a day, but the word experience is the source of all of my work right now, because what someone experiences is not only, that expectation is not only changing and evolving, it's actually behind a lot of this disruption. So I know you heard a lot of humanities thrown at you, sociology, anthropology. I'm a digital analyst. My day job is to study disruptive technology and its impact on every single business, every single industry. But as an anthropologist, specifically a digital anthropologist, it's also my job to understand technology's impact on people, behavior, culture, values, beliefs, because those things allow us to humanize change. We could all talk technology all day long, but unless we really understand how it's changing people, we can't solve problems. We can't truly innovate, and that takes a shift in perspective. So nothing says innovation like PowerPoint, so I am going to share with you some slides. Part of the challenge that we all face is this idea of what it is that we sell and what it is that we do. And we tend to hold ourselves individually to a center or a reference point that is normal. It's not a bad thing, it's just reality. We tend to buy and sell things based on this premise of what we think is normal. But that normal, that idea of normal, is starting to change to the point where behind every great disruption, there were years and years of behavioral shifts that started to take place that maybe we ignored but then finally came to life in what we call disruption. But Kodak, Blockbuster, you name it, Borders, any company that has been disrupted over time, right? If you look at Uber, I'm sure is one of the companies everybody references here. It didn't just happen overnight. It took a while for behavior to change, but more importantly, Uber was satisfying a demand that I don't think anybody held a secret. People wanted a better way to get from here to here, and they wanted to use technology in their mobile devices in ways that were invisible, transparent, and intuitive. Every story of disruption comes down to us losing touch with people and how their preferences change, how their standard for experiences change, what their aspirations are. And we allow ourselves to miss these things, to miss these cues, because we are always involved in the process of our day-to-day life. That doesn't change. You still get way too many emails, you still get way too many meetings, and at some point you're supposed to start to think and do things differently, but it's hard when you work within an environment that sort of rewards the process, repetition, normal. This is why innovation becomes a personal story, and for me, that source of innovation is perspective. The ability to see something differently and therefore to do something differently. And every expert around the world in every industry is saying experience is the thing. That's the thing that's going to help you figure this out. So then, what does the word experience actually mean? It's incredibly human. We sell experiences. People have experiences, but we can't design a great experience if we don't understand what someone values. An experience is something that we can design, but it's an emotional level. It's something someone feels. It's how they interpret it, how they sense it. And you can measure it by how someone reacts, but an experience never stops. A great experience continues. And in our world, we sell experiences, but people constantly want to have experiences. So it's not transactional. And in every industry that starts to face disruption, there's what we sell and what we do, and then there's what people want to experience, what they actually want to feel and share. And I think that in the middle there is this experience divide. And every one of our businesses has that divide, and that divide is growing every day, just like every business and every industry faces disruption. You could put on one side, for example, the music industry. And on the other side, you can put Spotify. And right there in the middle are the consumers. The experience they want to have sort of plays out in ways that inspires new innovation to serve them in better and different ways. But here's the thing that I find most interesting, and what I hope inspires you, is that innovation happens outside of your industry. In the best cases, looking inside of your own industry tends to sort of narrow what you see as possible. It's not a bad thing, it's just that's how life plays out. But the minute you open yourself to other industries, for example, Uber has created a standard for what people expect, an experience that affects every industry. So every single one of us in some way, shape, or form competes with an Uber. But understanding those cues, or in a funny way, why do people love Tinder? How has Tinder changed behavior? Understanding those things sort of leads to design cues, innovation cues, product and service cues that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. That's why I believe then that part of our own disruption, our individual disruption, is do we allow ourselves to challenge our own beliefs and values? Are we allowing ourselves to see differently rather than what we hold as the standard versus what other people hold as the standard? All great technology, all great startups, all great disruption comes down because someone decided to see and feel and do things differently. They allowed themselves to feel this level of empathy that you can't get if you don't live life like someone else. So in all of my research, there's a couple of things that I see consistently. One is we all have something to learn, and that's hard. That is hard because we've spent our entire careers, our work, getting experiences, having successes based on what we know. So anytime we have to learn something new, it's very difficult. The most difficult is unlearning the very things that actually prevent us from seeing what's possible or what's different. And this plays out, especially if anybody in the room, if you're a parent, you see it with your children every day. And what we try to do is hold them to this standard of yesterday, like put your phones down, talk to people, go outside. And those are all the right things to say. But this is a life that they know no other way around. This is just how they experience the world. And when you bring that world together, you have to ask yourself, what am I seeing versus what do I need to see? I use this picture as sort of this new Rorschach test. Many executives that I work with will always see the woman in the front. And they will say, look at this lovely woman. She's the only one in this picture actually enjoying the moment. Whereas everybody else, they're distracted. The argument is, that's not our decision or discussion to have. We're just supposed to look at this and say, well, what if everyone in this moment is actually in the moment? They just choose to experience it differently. So rather than argue with it, we now have to think about, how would I create an experience that matters to all people? What's that experience that brings this moment to life? And it's a shift in perspective. Look at this selfish woman here in the front, not sharing this special moment with all her Facebook friends that couldn't be there. They're the ones missing out. And this is that behavior that we now have to start to appreciate differently, because it never goes backwards. It only keeps accelerating to the point where we wonder, what happened? I went to bed and I woke up and everybody's different. Over the years, I've studied this behavior to the point where I've identified patterns where we don't have to think about things like, oh, well, what are the millennials doing? Let's design products and services that the millennials want to buy. That's too narrow. That's like saying, hey, let's keep selling products and services that old people want to buy. There's just a difference. There's a different generation that I found called Generation C, where the C stands for connected, and it's not one bound by age. It's one bound by common interests, behaviors, aspirations. And what I found is that anybody who lives an incredible digital lifestyle, meaning they have a smartphone, they use all the social networks, they use the most popular apps, they're always buying the latest Apple or Android product. These things play out in a new type of consumerism. And how they make decisions is different than any consumer before them. And every single day, this consumer base gets bigger. So yes, we still have to do the things we've done very well over the years, but now this is the exact source of disruption. This is exactly what Apple missed with iTunes. This is exactly how Spotify came in. This is exactly how Uber came in. They catered to this new consumer. And this consumer looks at their phone about 1,500 times a week. And that adds up to about 177 minutes every single day. And in those minutes, they are teaching themselves that they could get whatever information they want, they can get whatever products or services they want in real time. They can share something in social media and they can get a reaction in real time. If they don't get that reaction, they actually feel bad. So they'll share more. And this is a constant cycle that's changing us. This is an image from an art series where the photographer removes his smartphone from everyday scenarios so that we could see how pervasive technology has become in our lives. This doesn't go backwards. And I call the new consumer the part of the ecosystem because they are at the center of their own universe. And we tend to judge it before we accept it. We tend to look at this behavior as being bad. So we'll see an image like this and say, see, exactly. In my day, the best party ever was when we actually talked to one another. But to them, that is the best party ever because they're probably telling everybody that right now. They just experience that moment differently. And anytime, by the way, you start a sentence with, in my day, you're already out of touch. This is a real sidewalk in China. This does not go backwards. It continues to progress and evolve. We want things faster. We become more elusive. We become more connected and empowered. Where our own hierarchy of needs even starts to change. By the time I got to the expo today, I was down 55% on my battery. I'm freaking out of what 5 or 6 o'clock is going to look like. I had to go and find an outlet in the back. What you do starts to change based on how you value your relationship with technology. So I lovingly now call our consumers, our customers, accidental narcissists. Because every bit of technology, every app, every service is teaching them that they're the most important person in the world. Again, we look at this and we judge it, or we learn how to accept it. How could we lead this behavior to be more productive, to be more experiential? And that starts with challenging every bit of convention that you have around you. Your normal is the processes that you follow and the standards and the metrics that you use to define your success. You can't innovate unless you're willing to change that. And challenging everything around you starts with this. If you use any Microsoft product, you click a 3.5-inch diskette to save a file. That's ridiculous. And what's equally ridiculous is that half of you actually know what a 3.5-inch diskette is, so it's like, cool, that makes sense. Some of you think it's just a save icon. You have no idea what anything else could possibly be. And when you bring those worlds together, you realize that we just see the world differently. Yet we're trying to design for people that we want to see the world like us, because that's the world we know. Hey, kid, you ever seen one of these before? Oh, it's so cool that you 3D printed the save icon. It's just naturally different. And so what we have to do is design an experience for a world of which we just don't appreciate. And that, I think, is where what I call the relevance gap. There is this gap. Experiences can be brought together by understanding what someone values, looking to other industries to say, why do they love this product? Why do they love this service? What about it makes them excited or happy or whatever it is, and trying to bring those worlds together. And that takes asking different questions. Different questions, and maybe we're afraid to get the answers to, but they all have to be human-centered. They all have to be user-centered. And those questions actually give us the answers that tell us what to do. Change becomes less scary. Change becomes more of a series of steps, and we start to understand these things. All people want experiences. It's just what an experience is has to evolve. What does that play out in travel? How does someone make a decision around travel? How does someone shop for travel? Are they forcing the evolution of their journey, and are you keeping up with them, your touch points, your products, your services, the way you talk, the videos you create? Are you thinking about things from an infinity loop perspective that just creates a continual experience beyond just the travel? One of the things that, if you want homework, and trust me, if you really want to figure a lot of this out, there's great information. I spent the last 2 years with Google specifically studying how people make decisions about the travel industry. What trips they buy, how they buy them, how they search, what influences them, what type of trip they want. And all of this is available free online if you just Google my name and the word micro moments. So what Google found, and the reason why Google was doing this, is because people aren't searching the way they used to. And even Google feels like they're about to be disrupted. So they had to do all of the research that I'm asking you to do to figure out how they need to innovate. All of this is playing out in really wonderful, identifiable ways that aren't threatening. They're actually fantastic opportunities to change and evolve the way you do business. That starts with understanding this new consumer, sort of dissecting their journey, dissecting what they buy, what they love, and play it out. And then use that to inspire great new experiences that are relevant to someone who defines value different than the way that you might have defined value or how you've defined value over the years. What I want to leave you with is this. When you go back and you think about what you're going to do differently or the work that you have in your roadmap, hold it to one of these three things. Because what I found consistently in every single industry is that all too often companies confuse iteration with innovation. Maybe they're using new technology. Maybe they're building an app. Maybe whatever it is. Often that's just iteration, which I define as doing the same things better. Innovation is doing new things that unlock new value. And only one of those two leads to disruption, which is doing new things that make the old things obsolete. That's your metric. And you think about, they're all important. But this is exactly what we have to think about. Are we actually being iterative, or are we being innovative? And at the end of the day, all innovation doesn't happen overnight. It just becomes a way of life. It just becomes a different way of asking questions and trying to answer them and getting information that you didn't have or want before and doing something with it. And it's difficult because not everybody around you wants to change. Some people just want to actually keep going the way that they've always gone. Some people might even sabotage your efforts to try to bring about change. And that is all normal. This is why I believe there needs to be more psychology, sociology involved in work, because change really is hard. But innovation is something that has to begin with you. You have to decide that there are new possibilities, that we're not going to get there by being risk averse. We're not going to be there by trying to sell more product or greater volume the way things have always been as a way of appeasing our shareholders or our stakeholders. At the end of the day, any great innovation story is a story that begins with you and what you're going to do differently, and that starts with seeing things differently. Thank you.
Brian, have a seat. Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure you've all got lots of questions. If you use the Slido feature, then you're very welcome to send some of those in, and we'll certainly get them to Brian. But I've got a few questions I want to ask of my own. Starting with the point you've just made, you said, you know you're innovating when you make the old things obsolete. There might be some people in this room thinking, can't we have our cake and eat it? Can't we innovate in one area while keeping some of the old things which are performing quite well?
This is one of the quandaries that every business and every industry is facing. So one of the things I study specifically is the distinction between research and development and efforts towards innovation. And this is a lot of companies in every industry are opening up innovation centers now, Silicon Valley and around the world, as a specific means to explore that very question. One of the things that consistently comes up to the challenge, what's the greatest challenge to innovation? Most people will say our company culture. It's risk averse. We don't get rewarded for trying new things. Our whole training programs, our education programs within the organization are about doing things better, but the same things better. So what they try to do with these innovation centers or innovation teams is it could be 1 or 2 people, it could be 20 people. They get them out of the culture and they change it's like if I say, hey, think outside of the box, all you're doing is putting someone in the same box, right? Because you haven't changed the rules. So in this case, you give freedom to some of your employees to try to disrupt yourself. And that seems counterintuitive, but they do it in a safe environment, and they're rewarded for trying things, and they're even rewarded for failing, because that means they're trying and they're learning. So it's a different way of doing business. You don't want to take out all aspects of the things that work for you, but you do now need to start making investments in what happens next.
That sounds expensive.
Knew you were going to say that. It's every business looks at this as a cost center, and that's the problem. All great investments reward taking risks. You can't get ROI back on whatever you spend if it isn't going to do something new to return something new. And so any investor, and if there are any investors in the room, know that. And there are exceptional risks in taking risks, but that's all it takes is 1 or 2 great things to start building the muscle, start building the expertise necessary to let that work. And yeah, it's expensive, but it's more expensive to be out of business.
That's certainly true. Now let's talk about Generation C, Generation Connected. These are people who are going on holiday, but who are still interacting with their friends, with their family, with various brands while they're on holiday. How does that influence the holiday experience that they want?
Well, everything about it is, it's funny because the easy answer is, well, they all just take more selfies, but that's just, of course, in all seriousness, it's the path that they want, right? The destinations are even broadening in terms of what's popular, what's not popular, but it's what they do when they're there that is also changing. So, for example, a lot of really interesting research shows that maybe people don't want the traditional tour, people don't want the traditional package, people want. There's some really interesting experiments that will take people to all the popular food trucks or the secret holes in the wall or to this thing, and we'll balance that with the sightseeing. We'll balance that with you plugging into local cultures. There's a lot of really interesting things we would never have thought about would be part of a traditional holiday that are now the new aspiration for a holiday.
But that requires some complicated technology, doesn't it? To offer that kind of experience.
All that technology exists today in one shape or form, and if it doesn't, someone will create it. And I think that's part of the job of any innovation team is to look on the horizon. Now, they meet with the startup ecosystem. They're always talking to investors. They're looking at what do they need to know or what do they need to learn about so that they can start bringing in partnerships that allow them to experiment. Most of these new products and services come out of the result of just tiny little pilot programs. So they're not expensive and they're not as risky. But it's the greatest challenge is just accepting that you have something new to learn or that you can try something new. All of this is actually out there right now.
I'm interested you used the word partnership. We were talking about this before we came in for this session because, for instance, at BBC News, we have decisions to make about how much technology do we develop in-house and how much technology do we access via third-party partnerships with companies like Facebook. Presumably, big travel companies have the same decisions to make. Do we bring in the tech expertise or do we outsource it?
Yes. I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer to this, but I will say that if you remember, one of the greatest challenges to innovation was company culture. That company culture either accelerates or inhibits great innovation. And most of the time, the in-house innovation is, let's just say, constrained, to say it nicely. And so outside innovation doesn't have the same constraints. I think it's a balance of both. But I think once you start partnering with the ecosystem of what you have and what you don't have, and this all starts with identifying how the consumer's changing, it just becomes, I don't want to say programmatic, but it becomes clear as what that answer to that question would be.
I was also interested that you were talking about how we need to see consumers not in terms of age, but in terms of how they live and their habits, and that rang a lot of bells for me in news, where there's sometimes a feeling in news that everyone under 30 does it one way and everyone over 30 is doing it as they always did. But of course, 60-year-olds or 70-year-olds are having the way they consume news disrupted just as much as anyone else. In terms of how we learn more about these consumers and these groupings which you're describing, is that just a question of investing in the necessary research, or how do we go about accessing that information?
I think one is you have to want to, because believe it or not, a lot of companies, every company, I've never met a company that said we're not customer-centric, but they're not. They're shareholder-centric or they're process-centric. And so just the idea of wanting to do this is a big start. A big trend in all of this is called digital transformation. How are companies changing to compete in a digital economy? And the number one catalyst that accelerates change and maturity within these organizations is what's called CX, or customer experience. And a big part of that is customer journey mapping, experience mapping, really getting into what are the touch points, what does the journey look like. This is exactly how I discovered the Generation C concept. I was able to show that someone who lives a digital lifestyle was absolutely not content with going through traditional touch points. So that's why they were constantly finding alternatives to your company. And so in that regard, I found that 59-year-olds were making similar decision patterns as 27-year-olds, and that breaks all the rules of how we're supposed to look at marketing, product, sales, service, technology. So I think journey mapping is a start, but just even getting that skill or that expertise introduces you to a whole new world, as Aladdin would say.
And in terms of planning the journey of someone going on holiday, there are hundreds of companies here who are involved in that in lots of different ways. You referenced working with Google, and Google and Facebook in particular have positioned themselves between the consumer and a whole range of different companies, from news organizations to travel companies to the ad industry. And of course, they are taking a big piece of the pie. So I'd like to hear you describe how some of the big brands that are represented here position themselves to still connect with those consumers as effectively as possible, but maintain their income, because isn't there a risk that the companies doing the distributing, Facebook and Google primarily, start eating into that?
The interesting thing about that question is they're also not the last companies that are going to continue to eat into that and change that. And
right.
I think that's the challenge. A natural response from many executives that I work with is to fight it. Kill Google, kill Facebook, And I get it, right? That's just a natural reaction to resist change, is to try to be bigger than the other person or do what you did better or stronger or harder. Let's look at the automotive industry. The automotive industry was just content with following its course, make better cars, more aerodynamic cars, faster, more fuel efficient. And then comes Tesla. And Tesla says, we're going to change not only what the car is, but how you buy the car, how you maintain the car. And in the United States in particular, the natural reaction from the automotive industry was to block how Tesla sells cars. Tesla wanted to basically give consumers an Apple-like experience because the number one complaint that customers have when buying a new car is the dealership experience. So the natural response was to just shut it down. Don't let Tesla do this. Whereas the real response was, what can we learn from that? What are we doing wrong? How do we now start to innovate? At the same time that was happening, Google was investing in self-driving cars. It's not their business. Why were they doing this? Well, that's a different discussion, but that completely blindsided the automotive industry as well. Their first reaction was, that'll never be a thing. And now we are seeing some of the greatest disruption in the automotive industry simply because Google poked the right buttons and Tesla poked the right buttons, because consumers want that. And they're starting to express that in all of the other apps and services that they want. And the reason I'm saying this is now every single automotive industry had to stop asking that question.
Right.
They had to say, what do we need to do so that we can return to our shareholders by 2021, 2022, when these cars are actually on the road?
Right, I've got lots more questions, but so does everyone else, so let's get to some of them. Constantine would like to ask you, what would you suggest to a tour operator with a unique product, i.e. small cruises in Croatia, so quite specific, to reach Generation C? How does a small operator make those connections?
There's an American author who writes, you all know him, Rick Steves. He writes the travel guides to a lot of destinations around the world. He has a son who is specifically trying to answer this question. I don't know his first name, but if you get a moment, Google this. He's actually trying to create micro experiences for Generation C, and every bit of how he designs those products and how he sells them are specifically looking at what's unique about that customer journey, and then how do we get the customer connected to that information. So this Google research, if you download it, it's almost like a playbook, exactly what you need to do. The thing that's most interesting is that what they want to buy is different. And if you think about it, it's because we're all becoming increasingly impatient. We want everything now. We want everything to be about us. And those cues sort of make us smirk a little bit, but at the same time, you can design some really unique and great things you wouldn't have been able to see otherwise. So I think that's a great question. That all that research exists for whoever is asking this question. Your answer's there.
Okay, Constantine, thank you very much. Brian, thanks for your answer. Jira says, can you give us some examples of specific travel companies or types of holidays which are responding well to this disruption?
You know, what I'll do is I'll give you an example, but then I'll send you, I had to remove about 25 slides from the presentation for time, and in that presentation I have a lot of really great examples. There's not a great story of an entire transformation. You are seeing a lot of great stories in travel startups that are coming up simply because they're, for example, Lola, which I think is sort of taking this real-time concept of booking and discovery and adding artificial intelligence and also making it connected for a mobile device. There's a lot of really interesting examples in moments of truth, but I don't know that I could share with you a completely transformative company, because this is what digital transformation is all about. It's happening in small pockets of change. So Marriott, for example, one of the things that I like about this particular example, and I hope you find it relevant, is that when they realized that the new normal was changing, that's their whole business, is selling normal to travelers who want the consistent experience that they expect. And now when you look at connected travelers, they expect something different. So they love craft beer. They love going to explore things that they can call their own. They seek out the products in the stores around those neighborhoods, of which why then they'll go get an Airbnb so they could taste that local culture. So Marriott recognizes that they have space in their hotel room or in their building that has zero catering to that expectation. The restaurant is usually the same. It might be a different name, but the lighting's always really bright. You know, you have all, and then now they're looking at, well, we have unused rooftop space, and one Marriott experimented with putting grass on it, and they do these daily picnics, and people go up there and now have these unique experiences. There's a lot of stories like that, but even myself trying to find them to present to you is really, really difficult, because we're looking at, if you look at Hyatt, for example, their big investment is in the app, but that's just part of it, right? There has to be something more, and I think there's just a lot of cues to take outside of the industry in order to go and experiment, so that you become the case study everybody talks about.
Now, I know when you showed us that photo of everyone with their phones and the old lady without it, you said, don't fight this is the way it is. But Leela wants to ask, the question's disappeared, but actually I can remember it, which was, does every experience have to be a digital one?
No. That's a great question. No. But to the connected consumer, there is no distinction between digital and the real world. They coexist. And so understanding how to design for that and accept that, I think, is what a lot of, not just innovation, but empathy comes out. But I will say this, when the connected consumer is making a decision about where to go and what to do while on holiday or for business travel, what have you, almost every facet of that decision is not only digital, it's mobile. And specifically, a lot of those decisions are influenced by YouTube, because our attention span to read and go through a website or a brochure is not what it used to be. Everything about what you do in that 177 minutes every single day on your phone is teaching you to find information really quick. So YouTube has become one of the greatest influencers of all of the travel industry. I think something like 65% of all decisions are made based on a video they'll find on YouTube. And what's funny is, in the research I did with Google, we found no operator videos that were really remotely close to what a consumer was looking for. They were all promotional and very well produced and polished. But nobody has that expectation, and nobody has that patience to sit through all of that. So.
Now, this is reminding me of a discussion I had in South Africa a few months ago about digital authenticity, and how companies who are looking to enter the digital sphere were failing to produce content that felt authentic to the generation you're talking about.
Right. This is why we exist in an era of transparency, and people expect and trust the experiences of other people ahead of what you say about your experience. So they will go validate it based on, well, what did someone else say? And this is why reviews have become a thing, why videos have become a thing. And I mean, every industry, by the way, is affected by this. I did the same research that we did for Google in the travel industry of how people buy cars. Same exact findings. YouTube, the #1 influence. And there were no branded content that affected the decision. They were all, hey, here's a guy with a smartphone, so this is the steering wheel, and this is the button layout, and it was incredible what you learned.
Right, we've got 3 or 4 minutes left with Brian. Let's make the most of it. Josh asked a question I suspect quite a few of us had in the back of our mind. When you said, if you are just improving what you do, that's not innovation, you need to step outside of it. But Josh is saying, well, hold on, what happens if you're working somewhere where that's just incredibly difficult to do, and there is a management structure which is blocking your every attempt?
Well, Josh,
go and start a startup.
This is why, as an analyst, I also feel like maybe I should add the title of therapist to my business card, because this is hard. And you're going to need that validation in order to decide whether or not you quit or whether you stay, and how much you actually try. But the truth is that change is hard because not everybody wants it, right? Or they don't know they need it, or they don't know what to do about it. So I say every bit, if you're willing to give it a shot in your organization, you have to become 4 things. One is you have to become sort of an analyst, so that you can gather the data. So customer journey mapping, for example, leads to the things that you know what you would need to do or change in terms of your process. You need to become a lawyer so that you could present this data and this evidence in a storyful way that gets people to believe that maybe there's a new way or a new thing to try. You have to be a politician so that you can bring people to the table in a safe environment so that they can listen and try and believe, so that it's not just your idea, it's everybody's idea. And then you have to be a cheerleader because this is really hard and it's sometimes miserable, and you have to remind yourself that this is an important and the right thing to do. If those things aren't allowing you to progress, then yeah, you have to find a new gig. But I will say this, that the grass is not always greener on the other side. So this is why all change and all disruption is very difficult, but it's also inevitable. And we need our change agents. We need people like you, Josh, to go fight this fight. It's been my entire career. I don't think I've known what life is like without pushing a boulder up a hill.
I've got to ask you about brands. If we consider this connected generation, they are completely used to having almost endless choice, whether it's which TV show to watch, which music to listen to, which hotel to get. Do brands matter in the middle of that mix, or is it just the companies which offer us the selection?
So in the minute and a half, I will try to talk as quickly as I can.
You could write a whole book on this.
I did. It's called X, the experience when business meets design. The argument is that experience is the new brand. So no amount of branding is actually going to influence the experience someone has. So now you have to become, and you are in the experience design business. You are in the experience business. And designing experiences that people have, and more importantly, the ones that they share, that becomes the brand, right? If I'm looking at YouTube and making a decision about where to go based on the experience of someone else, that is the brand. So you have to understand that designing that becomes the future of all of this. And I wrote a paper, if you're interested. It's called Everything Every Business Can Learn from the State of the Music Industry. And if you think about artists as brands, there will never, ever be another Nirvana that defines a generation, because we don't enjoy or pay for or live music the way that we used to. And brands can become that ethereal now because we are too picky, we are too discerning, we are becoming more experimental, we are trying new things. So to be able to consistently be relevant to that consumer means you actually have to try to be consistently relevant. You can't sell and talk and market the way you used to.
And that, I'm afraid, is where we're going to have to leave it. I have many more questions, I'm sure you all do, but that's the end of the session. BrianSolis.com, is that where people
BrianSolis.com
is where people can find a lot more information about the work that Brian does. But on behalf of everyone here, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.